Thousands of years ago, the landscape of what we now call the Black Sea looked nothing like the vast, dark body of salt water we see on maps today. According to a growing body of scientific research, it was once a massive, isolated freshwater lake, cut off from the Mediterranean by a narrow strip of land where the Bosporus Strait now flows. The water level was hundreds of feet lower than it is today, and the surrounding fertile plains were likely home to some of the earliest farming communities in human history. But around 5600 BCE, a dramatic geological event changed everything. This is the foundation of the Black Sea deluge theory, a deep-sea mystery that suggests a sudden, catastrophic flood reshaped the world and perhaps left an indelible mark on the collective memory of mankind. The story begins with the end of the last ice age. As the great glaciers that covered much of the northern hemisphere began to melt, the global sea level rose significantly. For a long time, the land bridge at the Bosporus acted as a natural dam, keeping the rising Mediterranean at bay. However, as the pressure of the rising ocean increased, the dam eventually gave way. Geologists William Ryan and Walter Pittman, who first popularized this theory in the late 1990s, proposed that the Mediterranean burst through the strait with the force of 200 Niagara Falls. They argue that the salt water didn't just seep in. It roared, permanently drowning thousands of square miles of land in a matter of months. To find the truth behind these sunken structures and lost landscapes, researchers have turned to underwater archaeology and advanced geological testing. In 1999, the famous oceanographer Robert Ballard, known for discovering the Titanic, led an expedition into the Black Sea to look for physical evidence of this ancient shoreline. Using remote-controlled submersibles, his team scanned the dark, oxygen-free depths. What they found was startling: an ancient beach line, complete with shells from freshwater mollusks that had been dead for thousands of years, sitting hundreds of feet below the current sea level. This submerged shoreline provided the first physical smoking gun that the lake had once been much smaller and completely fresh. As the submersibles moved closer to the old coast, they discovered something even more intriguing. They located unexplained ruins that appeared to be man-made. These weren't grand stone temples like those found in later submerged civilizations, but rather simple wooden beams and stone tools that suggested human habitation. Because the deep waters of the Black Sea are anoxic, meaning they contain no oxygen, wood does not rot there as it does in other oceans. This unique environment acts as a natural time capsule, preserving organic materials that would have vanished anywhere else. The presence of these artifacts suggested that when the water rose, the people living on the plains had to flee, leaving their homes to be swallowed by the encroaching sea. The scientific community remains divided on exactly how fast this flooding occurred. While the catastrophic model suggests a wall of water that rose several feet per day, other researchers argue for a more gradual process. They point to sediment layers at the bottom of the sea, which show a transition from freshwater to saltwater species. By analyzing the chemistry of these shells, scientists can pinpoint exactly when the lake's ecology changed. These ancient ocean discoveries have turned the Black Sea into a massive laboratory for understanding how rapid climate change and rising sea levels can alter the course of human history. For those who study ancient myths, the timing of this event is impossible to ignore. Many cultures around the world share stories of a great, world-altering flood. From the Epic of Gilgamesh to the account of Noah in the Bible, the narrative of a sudden deluge that wiped out the known world is a common thread. Proponents of the Black Sea theory suggest that this event was so traumatic and widespread that it became the original flood story. As the survivors migrated into Europe and Mesopotamia, they carried the memory of the rising water with them, passing it down through generations until it was finally recorded in stone and parchment. To truly understand the scale of this ancient event, we have to look at the unique chemistry of the Black Sea itself. It is one of the strangest bodies of water on our planet. Because of its narrow connection to the Mediterranean, the water doesn't mix like a typical ocean. The top layer is fresh, oxygen-rich water from the rivers of Europe, but below a certain depth, there is a permanent layer of hydrogen sulfide. There is no oxygen and therefore no life as we know it. For an underwater archaeology team, this is both a challenge and a miracle. In most parts of the world, shipworms and bacteria would devour any sunken structures made of wood within decades. In the Black Sea, a wooden house or a prehistoric boat can remain perfectly preserved for thousands of years. During his expeditions, Robert Ballard's team focused on a site off the coast of Sinop, Turkey. Using high-resolution sonar, they identified a collapsed structure about 300 feet below the surface. When the cameras on their robotic vehicles reached the site, they didn't just find scattered stones. They found a rectangular area filled with wooden beams and branches that had been worked by human hands. It looked like a wattle and daub structure, a common building style for Neolithic farmers where wooden strips are woven together and covered with mud or clay. The fact that these branches were still sitting in their original positions after 7 millennia was a stunning piece of evidence for the deluge theory. It suggested that the water didn't just rise, it moved in and stayed, sealing these homes in an oxygen-free tomb. This discovery added a human face to the geological data. We weren't just looking at rising tides, we were looking at the moment a community was lost. Scientific analysis of the shells found near these structures confirmed that the transition from freshwater to saltwater was incredibly abrupt. Geologists examined sapropels, which are dark, organic-rich layers of sediment that form on the seafloor during periods of major environmental change. In the Black Sea, there is a distinct line in the mud. Below the line, the sediment is filled with the remains of lake-dwelling creatures. Immediately above it, the chemistry changes and Mediterranean species appear. This sharp boundary supports the idea that the break at the Bosporus was a singular, massive event rather than a slow, thousand-year seepage. However, the Big Flood theory is not without its critics. Some members of the scientific community argue that the Mediterranean didn't burst through all at once. They suggest that the Bosporus might have opened and closed multiple times as global sea levels fluctuated. These researchers point to different sediment cores that show a more complex history of water exchange. They believe the deluge might have been a series of smaller floods over several generations. While this might sound less dramatic for the people living there, the result was the same: the loss of their ancestral lands and the destruction of their way of life. The debate continues today, with each new core sample adding a piece to the puzzle of this submerged civilization. One of the most compelling parts of the investigation involves the mapping of the shelf break. This is the point where the shallow coastal shelf suddenly drops off into the deep basin of the sea. In the Black Sea, this shelf is remarkably wide, especially in the north near Ukraine and Romania. If the water level was indeed 300 to 500 feet lower in the past, this shelf would have been a vast, fertile plain. It would have been an ideal place for early humans to settle, with access to fresh water from the lake and rich soil for primitive farming. Today, that entire plain is a silent, underwater world of unexplained ruins, mostly hidden by layers of silt that have settled over the last 7,000 years. As we look at the movement of people during this time, the flood starts to explain more than just geography. Around 5,600 BCE, archaeological records across Europe show a sudden spread of new farming techniques and pottery styles. Some historians believe this was the result of a diaspora, a mass migration of people fleeing the flooded Black Sea basin. As they moved into the interior of Europe and the Near East, they brought their stories, their technology, and their culture with them. This would explain why so many different and distant cultures share a similar foundational myth of a great water that came and changed the world forever. While the search for houses and tools provides a glimpse into the lives of those who fled, the most haunting evidence of the Black Sea's transformation lies in its deep-sea mystery, the perfectly preserved shipwrecks. In recent years, the Black Sea Maritime Archaeology Project has used advanced robotic scanners to map the seafloor in unprecedented detail. What they found shocked the world of underwater archaeology. They discovered a graveyard of over 60 shipwrecks, some dating back to the Roman, Byzantine, and even Ottoman empires. Because of the anoxic layer we discussed earlier, these ships aren't just piles of rotting wood. Many still have their masts standing upright, their rudders in place, and even the original carvings on their prows visible. While these ships are younger than the original 7,600-year-old deluge, they prove that the Black Sea is a unique vault for human history. If a Roman merchant ship can remain intact for 2,000 years, it gives researchers immense hope that even older structures, perhaps the very boats used by the Neolithic people to escape the rising waters, might still exist in the deeper, darker sections of the sea. These ancient ocean discoveries are changing our understanding of how long man-made objects can survive beneath the waves. The Black Sea isn't just a site of a prehistoric flood. It is a library of every civilization that has sailed its waters since the Mediterranean first broke through. The presence of these ships also helps scientists refine the timeline of the flood itself. By studying the species of wood-boring worms present in the shallower, oxygenated parts of the sea versus the deep, oxygen-free zones, they can track how the water chemistry shifted over time. When the Mediterranean salt water first poured in, it was denser and heavier than the lake's fresh water. It sank to the bottom, creating the dead zone that exists today. This layering happened quickly, and it is the reason why the unexplained ruins of the original shoreline are so well preserved. The salt water didn't just drown the land, it acted as a preservative, encasing the pre-flood world in a chemical shield. This leads us to the work of Dr. Liviu Giason and his team, who have used satellite imagery and coastal modeling to challenge the sudden nature of the deluge. By looking at the Danube Delta, they suggest that the water level might have risen significantly, but perhaps not with the wall of water force that Ryan and Pittman originally proposed. They argue that the geography of the Bosporus might have slowed the flow, turning the catastrophe into a process that lasted several years rather than weeks. In this version of the story, the lost underwater cities weren't swallowed in an afternoon, but were slowly abandoned as the plains turned into marshes, and then finally into the sea. Regardless of the speed, the impact on the human population would have been staggering. Imagine a world where the horizon was constantly moving toward you. Every season, the old beach would be further inland. The springs that people relied on for fresh water would become salty and undrinkable. This slow-motion disaster would have forced a massive reorganization of human society. It wasn't just a loss of land, it was a loss of sacred spaces, ancestral burial grounds, and the entire environmental context of their lives. This tension between the scientific data of sediment cores and the emotional weight of a displaced population is where the true story of the Black Sea lies. As we look deeper into the basin, we find that the Black Sea still holds many secrets that our current technology is only just beginning to reach. There are vast areas of the submerged shelf that have never been touched by a sonar beam. Beneath meters of fine silt, there could be entire villages, preserved in the same way as the ships, waiting to tell us what life was really like before the Mediterranean changed the map of the world. The hunt for these submerged civilizations is no longer just about proving a theory, it is about recovering a lost chapter of our own origin story. If the Black Sea deluge was indeed the event that triggered the great flood myths of antiquity, then we should expect to find more than just geological markers. We should find the physical traces of a panicked migration. Archaeologists working on the coastlines of Bulgaria and Romania have discovered a curious pattern in the Neolithic settlements they excavate on land. Around the time of the proposed flood, many flourishing coastal villages were abruptly abandoned. These people didn't just leave behind broken pottery, they left behind a trail of new settlements that moved higher and higher into the Balkan Mountains and across the plains of Central Europe. These researchers are looking for cultural signatures, specific ways of making tools or building houses, that suddenly appear in places where they didn't exist before. The theory is that as the water claimed the lowlands, the survivors didn't just scatter, they brought their entire way of life with them. This diaspora might be the reason why agriculture spread so rapidly through Europe during this specific window of time. The people of the sunken plains were likely advanced for their era, having lived in a stable, fertile environment for thousands of years. When they were forced out, they became the world's first climate refugees, carrying the seeds of civilization and the memory of the water into the heart of a new continent. But the most tantalizing evidence remains hidden beneath the seafloor. To find it, scientists are now focusing on paleochannels. These are the dried-up beds of ancient rivers that once flowed across the plains before the flood. Using sub-bottom profiling, a type of sonar that can penetrate deep into the mud, researchers have mapped the paths of these ghost rivers. Along their banks is where the highest density of human life would have been. If there are lost underwater cities or even small hamlets still intact, they will be found along these ancient shorelines, buried under centuries of protective silt. The logistical challenge of excavating these sites is immense. At depths of several hundred feet, traditional archaeology is impossible. Researchers must rely on remotely operated vehicles, ROVs, equipped with delicate robotic arms and suction hoses. It is a slow, painstaking process. A single square meter of the seafloor can take days to clear of sediment. Yet, the reward for this patience is the possibility of finding a Neolithic Pompeii, a site so perfectly preserved by the anoxic water that we could see the very hearths where families cooked their last meals before the Mediterranean roared through the Bosporus. In the midst of this scientific hunt, we must also consider the environmental lessons the Black Sea offers us today. The story of the deluge is a reminder that the Earth's geography is not permanent. A change in sea level by just a few meters can erase entire cultures and reshape the map of a continent. As we uncover these sunken structures and study the ancient ocean discoveries of the Black Sea, we aren't just looking into the past. We are looking at a blueprint of how humanity responds to a world in flux. The survivors of the Black Sea didn't just disappear. They adapted, migrated, and rebuilt, leaving behind a mystery that would take 7,000 years for their descendants to finally begin to solve. The search for the truth of the Black Sea deluge is a journey that connects the deep-sea mystery of the abyss with the highest peaks of human folklore. Whether it was a sudden, roaring waterfall or a steady, unstoppable rise, the event changed the world. It turned a freshwater paradise into a saltwater tomb, preserving a moment in time that still haunts our collective imagination. As technology improves and our ability to peer through the silt grows, the Black Sea will surely reveal more of its secrets, proving that beneath the dark waves history is never truly lost. It is simply waiting to be found.